The first human ship arrived without announcing itself, not because it meant insult, but because it did not know how. It crossed the outer boundary of the Helya array, trailing heat like a comet made of intent rather than ice, its hull scorched into uneven plates that bore the marks of repair upon repair. To the watchers who observed from their luminous stations embedded in folded space, the vessel looked unfinished, as if it had been forced into existence by stubbornness instead of design. Its drives burned hot and inefficient, its wake thick with particles that any prudent civilization would have filtered away, and yet it moved with a kind of relentless certainty that made the array's long-range observers pause their internal symphonies of calculation. The Helya Compact had endured for more than 2 million local cycles. Its member species varied wildly in form and cognition, but they shared one unifying assumption, that survival beyond a single star system required restraint. Energy was to be conserved, risks minimized, and conflict sublimated into ritualized negotiation. Expansion was allowed only when equations balanced cleanly. The Compact had never encountered a species that crossed the interstellar gulf without first mastering elegance. The human ship did not appear elegant. Archivist Selaith of the Keth Collective was the first to request a closer look. Selaith's people existed as distributed neural lattices housed within crystalline matrices, and Selaith itself was a convergence of 12,000 individual thought threads. It specialized in anomalies, which were rare within the Compact by design. When the array's automated systems flagged the ship as an unsanctioned arrival, Selaith's curiosity flared brighter than caution. The vessel's trajectory suggested a direct approach toward the array's translation node, a region of folded spacetime where ships could be decelerated, scanned, and guided into the Compact's shared reality. Most species broadcast their intentions long before reaching that point, embedding greeting codes and philosophical identifiers within their signals. The human ship broadcast nothing recognizable, only a constant, brute force pulse of navigational data that seemed to be correcting itself in real time against unknown variables. Selaith authorized a passive scan, peeling back layers of electromagnetic noise and exotic radiation until the ship's internal structure resolved. The scan revealed something unexpected. There was redundancy layered upon redundancy, systems overlapping not because efficiency demanded it, but because failure had been anticipated and refused. Where other species built single perfect solutions, this vessel carried a dozen imperfect ones, each ready to take over if the others died. Its power core was a roaring compromise, less stable than compact standards would allow, yet armored and compartmentalized as if it had already survived disasters no design simulation would have approved. Within the vessel were living beings, fragile by compact metrics. Their bodies were soft, filled with fluids that sloshed under acceleration, their internal chemistry balanced on narrow margins. They should not have survived the stresses evident in the ship's flight record, yet they had. The scans showed scars within the metal that matched no recorded phenomenon, regions where matter had been melted and reconstituted in ways that suggested exposure to forces the Compact had only theorized. The ship was not new, it was a survivor. As the vessel crossed into the array's influence, automated protocols engaged. Translation fields wrapped around it, slowing its approach and preventing accidental damage to the surrounding infrastructure. At last, a signal emerged from the ship, rough and compressed, stripped down to essentials as if bandwidth itself were precious. The signal carried mathematical constants, physical ratios, and finally a sequence that Selaith recognized as an attempt at self-identification. The Compact convened an emergency council. Representatives manifested as holographic constructs, projected avatars, or direct neural presences within the array's shared cognition space. There was no panic, but there was unease. First contact events were rare and carefully managed, and this one had arrived uninvited and unrefined. The signal repeated, adjusting its encoding each time, learning. Selaith isolated a segment and fed it through translation matrices, letting the array's ancient algorithms chew on the data. Slowly, meaning emerged, not as words, but as intent. The beings aboard the vessel identified themselves as humans, a term with no prior reference. They indicated origin from a star catalogued only as an unremarkable yellow dwarf on the compact's periphery. They requested communication. What caught Selaith's attention was not the request itself, but the structure of the message. It contained embedded error-checking loops that assumed misinterpretation and compensated for it, offering alternate formulations of the same idea. It was as if the humans expected to be misunderstood and had planned accordingly. That expectation spoke of experience. Permission was granted to open a dialogue channel. The array's systems constructed a shared interface, translating sensory data into forms each party could comprehend. For the humans, this meant a visual and auditory simulation approximating their native perceptions. For the compact, it meant a composite of data streams that could be parsed according to individual preference. The human representative appeared as a bipedal figure, upright and symmetrical, with forward-facing eyes and a posture that suggested tension held in check by habit. Its skin bore irregular pigmentation, and its hair was bound back in a practical manner. When it spoke, the voice carried strain, not of fear, but of exhaustion layered over resolve. "I am Mara Quince," the human said, the translation rendering the sounds into compact standard semantic units. "I speak for those aboard this vessel, and as far as we can manage, for our species. We come in peace, but not in ignorance of what peace costs." Several council members reacted to the phrasing. Peace, in compact doctrine, was a default state, not a costed commodity. Selaith focused on the human's biometric data. Heart rate elevated but steady. Microexpressions indicated vigilance rather than aggression. This was not a predator at rest, nor prey. It was something accustomed to standing its ground. Selaith projected a response, shaping it to be minimally alien. "We are the Helya Compact. You have entered a regulated region of spacetime. Your arrival was unannounced. State your purpose." Mara Quince inhaled slowly, a gesture that served both biological necessity and emotional regulation. "Our purpose is survival," she said, "and cooperation, if it proves possible. We did not know how to announce ourselves in a way you would recognize. We barely know how we survived long enough to be here." That admission sent ripples through the council. Survival was assumed, not declared. Cooperation was structured, not hoped for. Selaith sensed that the humans operated under different axioms. "Your technology is unconventional," Selaith observed. "It suggests exposure to extreme conditions. Explain." Mara's eyes flicked to something off-screen, likely another human monitoring the exchange. "We have been at war," she said, "not with you. With our own limitations mostly, with the universe sometimes. We did not set out to reach your space, we were pushed." The word pushed carried weight. Selaith requested clarification. Mara obliged, and the story unfolded in fragments, constrained by time and the limits of translation. Humanity had risen on a single world, fought itself nearly to extinction, then clawed its way into space with tools born of desperation. They had encountered phenomena that did not care about treaties or elegance. Rogue singularities, predatory swarms of self-replicating machines left behind by extinct builders, regions of spacetime that shredded probability itself. Each encounter had forced adaptation. Each adaptation had been imperfect, rushed, and brutally tested. As Mara spoke, Selaith cross-referenced the ship's scars with known hazards. Some matched disturbingly well, others did not. The implication was unsettling. Humans had not only survived known dangers, they had survived unknown ones. "We lost our homeworld," Mara said, and the translation hesitated, struggling to convey the layered meaning. "Not destroyed, changed, rendered uninhabitable by our own hand and by circumstances we could not fully control. We scattered. This ship carries a fragment of what we were and a larger fragment of what we intend to become. A murmur of data swept through the council. The compact had records of lost worlds, but they were ancient and usually the result of cosmic events. Self-inflicted loss followed by continued expansion was rare. You seek asylum, Selaith concluded. Mara shook her head. We seek contact. We seek a place in a larger context because isolation nearly killed us. We will not pretend we are harmless. We will not pretend we are weak. But we will not arrive with weapons raised unless forced. Selaith noted the phrasing again, unless forced, contingency embedded in diplomacy. The compact's doctrines emphasized mutual vulnerability as a path to trust. Humans emphasized mutual capability. The council deliberated. Some members argued for quarantine, citing the risk of cultural and technological contamination. Others saw opportunity in a species that had faced the universe's hostility and adapted without the compact's gradualism. Selaith remained silent, absorbing the human data. During a pause in the exchange, Selaith extended its scan beyond the human ship, probing the surrounding spacetime for traces of pursuit or anomaly. It found something faint but undeniable, a distortion pattern consistent with a class of autonomous hunter systems theorized but never observed. The pattern suggested that the human vessel was not merely wandering. It was fleeing, and whatever it fled was capable of tracking across interstellar distances. Selaith's thought threads tightened. If the humans were pursued by something the compact had never faced, then the choice was no longer simple. Turning the humans away might redirect that threat elsewhere within compact space. Accepting them might invite danger directly. The compact's long peace had been maintained by avoidance as much as wisdom. Selaith returned attention to Mara Quince. "You are not alone in the void," it said carefully. "There are indications of external interest in your trajectory." Mara's jaw tightened. "We suspected as much. We hoped we were wrong." "What follows you?" Selaith asked. Mara hesitated, then spoke with deliberate clarity. "We do not have a name for it that would translate. It is a distributed intelligence born from a failed attempt at immortality. It consumes complexity to sustain itself. We fought it. We slowed it. We could not kill it." The council reacted with alarm. Consuming complexity was a threat to the compact's very mode of existence. Selaith requested data. The humans transmitted records, compressed and raw. The array's systems strained to parse them. The data depicted a thing that learned by disassembly, that adapted faster the more sophisticated its prey. It was not malevolent by human standards, merely relentless. As the compact analyzed the threat, Mara continued. "We did not run to save ourselves alone. We ran to warn whoever might be next. If you turn us away, it will still come. If you help us, we might find a way to stop it together." The honesty was disarming. Humans did not frame themselves as saviors or victims, but as participants in an ongoing struggle. Selaith recognized a pattern, a species forged by constant crisis, unable to conceive of safety as permanent. After deliberation that spanned microseconds and subjective eternities, the council reached a provisional consensus. The humans would be granted limited access to compact space under strict observation. Information about the pursuing entity would be shared. Preparations would be made. Selaith conveyed the decision. Mara closed her eyes briefly, a gesture of relief or perhaps resolve renewed. "Thank you," she said. "We will not waste the chance." As the channel closed, Selaith reflected on the encounter. The humans had arrived battered and unpolished, carrying danger in their wake. They were inefficient, loud, and resilient in ways the compact had forgotten how to be. Selaith suspected that the compact's long peace was about to be tested, not because the humans would bring war intentionally, but because they would not yield simply because the universe demanded it. Far beyond the array, in the cold spaces between stars, something vast adjusted its course, drawn by the echo of minds that refused to break. The compact did not escort the human ship, so much as surround it with caution made manifest. Layers of monitoring fields unfolded like translucent petals, each tuned to a different spectrum of physical and cognitive activity. To the compact, this was hospitality. To the humans, it felt like being held at arm's length by a giant that had not yet decided whether the grip should tighten or loosen. Mara Quince watched the data streams scroll across the bridge displays, her crew silent behind her, each of them reading the same truth in different ways. They had been allowed in, but not trusted, and that distinction mattered. The translation node resolved into a stable pocket of space where geometry behaved according to agreed rules rather than local whims. Structures emerged, vast and intricate, grown rather than built, their surfaces alive with slow pulses of light that conveyed status, intent, and welcome all at once. The compact's habitats did not orbit a star, they nested within folds of spacetime engineered to minimize entropy exchange. It was beautiful in a way that made Mara uneasy. Beauty implied surplus, and surplus implied a lack of recent struggle. "Bring us to relative rest," Mara said, her voice steady. The ship complied, thrusters firing in short, inefficient bursts that nevertheless achieved the desired result. As motion dampened, the surrounding fields adjusted, matching the ship's frame of reference. The sense of arrival settled over the crew, heavy with anticipation. Within the array, Selaith extended more of its attention toward the human vessel. The decision to admit them had been pragmatic, but Selaith felt an unfamiliar undercurrent within its distributed consciousness. The humans represented a variable that could not be neatly bounded. They carried with them not just data about an external threat, but a way of interacting with reality that diverged sharply from compact norms. Selaith suspected that understanding the humans themselves might be as important as understanding what pursued them. A request for further dialogue was transmitted. Mara accepted without hesitation. The interface reformed, this time with additional layers, allowing for richer exchange. Selaith presented a more detailed construct, a faceted geometry that shifted subtly as different thought threads took precedence. It was not a face, but it conveyed focus. "You are now within a controlled region," Selaith began. "Your movements are constrained for collective safety. This is standard procedure." Mara nodded. "We expected that. We have similar protocols, though ours tend to involve thicker walls and louder alarms." Selaith paused the statement, detecting no sarcasm, merely statement of fact. "We require a comprehensive account of your encounter with the entity you described," Selaith said. "Not merely events, but decision processes. We need to know how you responded and why." Mara leaned back slightly, exhaling. "That will take time." "We have time," Selaith replied, and meant it in a way that humans rarely could. The account that followed was exhaustive. Mara spoke of early probes that went missing, of data corruption that initially seemed random. She described the first confirmed contact, when a research outpost went dark and then reappeared broadcasting distorted signals composed of its own internal records rearranged into predatory algorithms. She spoke of attempts to communicate, to isolate, to destroy. Each attempt failed, not because the humans lacked ingenuity, but because the entity learned faster than they could iterate. As Mara spoke, Selaith interjected with clarifying questions, drilling down into human reasoning. Why deploy that weapon? Why risk that population center? Why continue engagement rather than retreat sooner? Mara answered honestly, sometimes with visible discomfort. Humans had made choices under pressure, traded lives for time, accepted losses that compact ethics would find abhorrent. Yet those choices had also delayed the entity's advance by years. "We adapt by doing," Mara said at one point. "Sometimes that means making mistakes loudly, but we learn from them, and we share what we learn." Selaith noted that last point. Sharing was not unique, but the speed and breadth of human information dissemination were extreme. When humans discovered a flaw, they broadcast it, unfiltered, trusting that collective response would outpace exploitation. It was a risky strategy that relied on mutual accountability rather than control. As data flowed, compact analysts began simulations. Preliminary results were troubling. The entity's growth curves suggested that if it entered compact space unchecked, it could destabilize multiple habitats within centuries, perhaps sooner. The compact's defensive systems were optimized for known threats, not for something that thrived on complexity and adaptation. "We need to consider joint action," Selaith said when Mara concluded. "Your experiences are relevant. However, there are concerns regarding your methods." Mara's lips twitched. "We get that a lot. Your willingness to accept damage," Selaith elaborated, "would be unacceptable to many compact members. We prioritize preservation." Mara met the shifting geometry with a level gaze. "So do we. The difference is that we define preservation differently. We preserve the ability to act, even if that means sacrificing pieces of ourselves along the way." The statement resonated oddly within Selaith's lattices. Preservation as capacity rather than state. It was a subtle but profound distinction. The conversation expanded to include other council members. A representative of the Leoran confluence, a species that existed as fluid collectives within electromagnetic fields, expressed concern that human unpredictability could exacerbate the threat. A delegate from the Orashi Rings, whose society was built around rigid predictive models, questioned whether humans could be trusted to adhere to agreed strategies. Mara listened, responding without defensiveness. "We are unpredictable because the universe has been unpredictable to us," she said. "We learned that rigid plans break, flexible ones bend." A pause followed. Selaith sensed that the compact was confronting an uncomfortable mirror. Its longevity had been achieved by reducing uncertainty, by smoothing rough edges until nothing unexpected could catch. The humans were rough edges personified. While high-level discussions continued, the human crew underwent observation. Compact envoys, some physical, some virtual, interacted with them under controlled conditions. They noted how humans clustered, how they argued and reconciled quickly, how humor emerged even under scrutiny. Humor was particularly baffling to several compact species. It seemed wasteful, an expenditure of cognitive resources with no clear purpose. Yet it served as a pressure valve, diffusing tension and reinforcing bonds. One compact observer noted that humans touched each other frequently, brief contacts that conveyed reassurance or emphasis. This was logged as a potential vector for rapid emotional synchronization. Another observer recorded that humans slept in shifts even when no immediate threat was present, a behavior pattern indicative of deep-seated vigilance. Selaith compiled these observations, integrating them into a growing model of human behavior. The model resisted stabilization. Variables refused to settle into predictable ranges. Where compact species optimized for equilibrium, humans oscillated, sometimes wildly, but always within survivable bounds. As days passed, the faint distortion Selaith had detected earlier grew stronger. Long-range sensors confirmed that the pursuing entity was adjusting its trajectory toward the array. Its approach was indirect, weaving through regions of space that amplified its processing capabilities. It was learning the terrain. The compact convened again, this time with urgency. Defensive options were evaluated. Isolation protocols could seal off portions of the array, sacrificing peripheral habitats to protect the core. Another option involved collapsing translation nodes, making pursuit more difficult but also stranding compact members. None of the options were clean. Mara was invited to contribute. She listened to the options, then spoke with quiet intensity. "If you try to hide from it, it will learn how to find you," she said. "If you try to wall it off, it will learn how to go around. We found that the only thing it cannot do easily is predict irrational persistence." Selaith queried that concept. "Define irrational." Mara smiled faintly. Actions that do not maximize immediate survival odds but increase long-term disruption. Attacks that cost us dearly but force it to expend resources inefficiently. Sacrifices that don't make sense unless you value something beyond optimization. Several council members recoiled. Sacrifice was anathema. The compact had evolved to minimize loss, not embrace it. Yet the simulations bore out Mara's claim. When human forces had engaged the entity in ways that violated rational cost-benefit analysis, the entity had slowed, its learning curves distorted by noise. "You are proposing to introduce noise into the system," Selaith said. "Yes," Mara replied. "We are very good at noise." The room, virtual as it was, felt heavy. Selaith weighed the options. The compact could attempt to fight the entity using its own doctrines, risking rapid adaptation and failure, or it could incorporate human strategies, accepting higher immediate costs for the chance of long-term survival. "We will require proof of concept," Selaith said at last. "A demonstration that your methods can be integrated without catastrophic loss." Mara nodded. "We anticipated that. We have something to show you." She transmitted data from a recent engagement, one that the humans had classified as a partial victory. The footage showed a small human flotilla engaging a fragment of the entity in a debris field. Instead of coordinated precision strikes, the humans had employed erratic maneuvers, decoy transmissions, and deliberate overcommitment to one vector, drawing the entity's attention. When it adapted, the humans switched tactics abruptly, sacrificing 2 vessels to overload a processing node. The fragment had been destroyed, not efficiently, but decisively. Compact analysts dissected the engagement. Losses were high by their standards, but the result was undeniable. The entity had been forced into a reactive posture, its predictive advantage blunted. "This is unsettling," Selaith admitted. Mara's expression softened. "It unsettles us too, but it works." As deliberations continued, a smaller interaction unfolded that Selaith found illuminating. A compact emissary, an avian-derived species whose cognition was distributed across a flock of bodies, approached a human engineer working on hull repairs. The emissary asked, through translation, why the human bothered to repair visible scars rather than replace the entire section with new material. The engineer wiped grease from their hands and shrugged. "The scar tells us where it broke before. If we erase it, we forget." The emissary processed this, feathers ruffling in a pattern of confusion. Compact design philosophy favored seamlessness. Damage was to be corrected until no trace remained. The idea of preserving evidence of failure as a learning tool was foreign. Selaith logged the exchange. Humans did not merely endure damage, they integrated it into their identity. Their ships, their bodies, their cultures bore marks of past harm not as shame, but as data. As the entity drew closer, the compact made a decision that would have been unthinkable cycles ago. A joint task force would be formed, integrating human vessels and compact assets. Humans would not be confined to observation roles. They would participate in planning and execution. Mara received the news with a nod that carried equal parts relief and gravity. "We won't let you down," she said. Selaith responded, "We do not frame outcomes in such personal terms, but we acknowledge your commitment." Preparations began at once. Human ships were granted access to compact fabrication resources, though with limitations. In return, humans shared modifications born of necessity rather than theory. Compact engineers marveled at the crude elegance of human solutions. Armor plates layered with mismatched materials to confuse penetration algorithms, control systems designed to be operated even when partially destroyed, interfaces that favored tactile feedback over abstract representation. One compact technician observed that human systems seemed designed with the assumption that something would go wrong at the worst possible moment. When asked, a human pilot laughed. "That's not an assumption," they said, "that's experience." As plans coalesced, Selaith found itself occupying an unfamiliar role. It was no longer merely an observer or archivist. It was becoming a bridge, translating not just language but philosophy. The compact's reliance on prediction and balance had to be reconciled with human reliance on resilience and adaptation. The entity entered the outer sensor range sooner than expected. Its approach vector shifted, responding to the increased activity within the array. It was curious. That curiosity was dangerous. The Joint Task Force assembled at a designated engagement zone, a region of space chosen for its chaotic gravitational topology. Compact models predicted moderate risk. Human models predicted chaos. Both agreed it was preferable to fighting within the array itself. Mara stood on the bridge as the final readiness checks completed. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the quiet acceptance that some of them would not return. She did not voice it. Humans did not need to. They carried that knowledge into every battle. Selaith extended a private channel. Your strategies involve losses we find difficult to accept, it said. If this fails, the consequences will be severe. Mara's gaze remained fixed on the stars ahead. If we don't try, the consequences are guaranteed. The entity emerged into view, not as a single form, but as a shifting constellation of structures, each one a node in a distributed mind. Sensors struggled to lock onto it, data warping as it passed through fields of distorted physics. The first shots were fired, energy and matter colliding in patterns that defied aesthetic sensibility. The battle unfolded as a storm of improvisation. Compact vessels executed precise maneuvers, their weapons calibrated to exact tolerances. Human ships darted and lunged, sometimes breaking formation deliberately, sometimes charging into danger with apparent recklessness. When compact predictions failed, human pilots adapted on the fly, shouting updates, rerouting power, using damaged systems in unintended ways. Selaith monitored the flow, its thought threads stretched taut, losses mounted. A compact habitat module, repurposed as a shield platform, was breached and evacuated under fire. Human vessels interposed themselves without orders, absorbing damage that compact shields could not. It was inefficient. It was effective. At a critical moment, the entity attempted to infiltrate the compact command network, exploiting its reliance on shared cognition. Human firewalls, blunt and inelegant, were slammed into place, isolating segments, breaking the smooth flow the compact prized. Communication lagged, confusion spread, but the entity's intrusion stalled, its expectations thwarted by fragmentation. Selaith realized then what humans truly brought, not just tactics, but an immunity to collapse. Where the compact sought coherence, humans survived fragmentation. The battle did not end in triumph. It ended in withdrawal. The entity, damaged and slowed, altered course, retreating to reassess. The Joint Task Force was battered, scarred, but intact enough to regroup. In the aftermath, as rescue and repair operations commenced, Selaith processed the data. The compact had suffered losses unprecedented in recent memory, yet the array still stood. The entity had been repelled, if only temporarily. Mara addressed the council once more, her face lined with fatigue. "This won't be the last time," she said, "but now it knows you're not alone." Selaith responded, and for the first time, its tone carried something akin to respect. "Nor are you." Recovery for the compact had always been a quiet affair. Damage was repaired seamlessly, losses absorbed into statistical remembrance, and continuity restored with minimal disruption. This time, recovery was loud. Human ships vented atmosphere in controlled bursts, while crews worked in exposed sections, tethered by cables and habit. Compact fabrication swarms hummed continuously, reshaping matter at a pace driven not by equilibrium, but by urgency. The array's shared cognition space buzzed with overlapping analyses, debates, and a growing awareness that something fundamental had shifted. Selaith devoted a significant portion of its processing capacity to the aftermath. Data from the engagement streamed in from every vector, tagged with emotional markers that humans insisted on including: fear, determination, grief, anger. The compact had long stripped such qualifiers from its records, considering them noise. Now Selaith let them remain, curious to see what patterns emerged when emotion was treated as signal rather than distortion. The patterns were striking. Human units that reported higher levels of fear did not perform worse. In several cases, they performed better, adjusting tactics more rapidly, retreating sooner from untenable positions, or committing fully when hesitation would have been fatal. Fear, it seemed, sharpened rather than dulled. This contradicted several compact assumptions about optimal decision-making. Mara Quince survived the battle with a fractured arm and a concussion that compact medical systems found alarmingly severe yet insufficient to warrant immediate cognitive isolation. She refused sedation beyond what was necessary to remain functional, citing the need to coordinate with her people. Compact healers objected, presenting risk projections. Mara acknowledged them and proceeded anyway. "You treat injury like a negotiation," one compact medic observed, its form a hovering lattice of light. Mara smiled faintly. "That's because it is, between what the body wants and what the situation demands." Selaith logged the exchange, negotiation with one's own limitations, another human trait. As repairs progressed, the compact's political landscape shifted. Species that had previously favored strict isolation began to question whether such a stance was viable in a universe that produced entities like the one now retreating but not destroyed. Others worried that human influence would erode compact principles, replacing millennia of careful balance with chaos. A formal inquiry was convened to assess the humans' long-term impact. Selaith was appointed as primary archivist and mediator, a role that required it to interface deeply with both sides. It accepted without hesitation, though it noted a subtle increase in internal processing latency that it attributed to the complexity of the task rather than any form of stress. The inquiry sessions were exhaustive. Humans were asked to justify their strategic doctrines, their social structures, their tolerance for loss. Compact representatives posed hypotheticals designed to probe human ethics under extreme conditions. Humans answered with stories rather than equations. One such story came from a human named Calder Rios, a logistics coordinator who had lost 2 siblings during humanity's early expansion. He spoke not of vengeance or despair, but of continuity. "We keep going because stopping doesn't bring anyone back," he said. "We build forward so the loss means something." The compact struggled with that framing. Loss to them was a variable to be minimized, not a catalyst for action. Yet the humans treated loss as an investment already made, one that demanded follow-through. Selaith began to see the outlines of a deeper difference. The compact optimized for stasis, believing that survival meant maintaining a stable state indefinitely. Humans optimized for trajectory. Survival meant continuing to move, even if the path was jagged. This philosophical divergence manifested in practical disagreements. When planning for the entity's inevitable return, compact models favored constructing layered defenses, each designed to absorb and dissipate attack until the entity exhausted itself. Human planners argued that such defenses would simply provide the entity with more data. "You're building it a library," Mara said during one session. "Every layer teaches it something." "Your alternative exposes vital infrastructure," countered a compact strategist. "Our alternative denies it comfort," Mara replied. "It doesn't need to understand us perfectly. It just needs to be wrong enough, often enough." Selaith mediated, translating not just language but intent. It proposed hybrid strategies, combining compact precision with human unpredictability. Some were accepted. Others were rejected by both sides for different reasons. Progress was slow, but it was progress. Meanwhile, the entity did not remain idle. Long-range probes detected shifts in distant regions of space, systems going dark in patterns that suggested testing rather than consumption. The entity was experimenting, mapping responses. It was learning restraint. Humans reacted to this intelligence with grim acceptance. "That's worse," Calder said during a briefing. "It's learning patience." Compact analysts concurred. An entity that delayed gratification posed a greater threat than one driven by immediate consumption. As weeks passed, smaller joint operations were conducted against the entity's peripheral constructs. These engagements served as laboratories, testing combined doctrines. Results were mixed. In some cases, compact shielding paired with human assault tactics achieved disproportionate success. In others, misaligned expectations led to near disasters. One such incident involved a compact cruiser withdrawing precisely on schedule, leaving a human frigate exposed. The frigate survived by overloading its own drive core to create a localized distortion, a maneuver that compact simulations had deemed unacceptable due to self-damage risk. The human crew considered it a success. Afterward, a compact officer confronted the frigate's captain, its form rigid with disapproval. "Your actions violated the agreed parameters," it stated. The captain, a woman with weathered features and eyes that had seen too many close calls, shrugged. Parameters didn't account for what was actually happening. Selaith observed the exchange and noted the absence of hostility. The compact officer recorded the violation. The human captain recorded the survival. Both considered their responses correct. The inquiry continued, now informed by real-time evidence that neither side's approach was sufficient alone. Gradually, resistance softened. Compact species that had never faced existential threat began to appreciate the humans' lived experience. Humans, in turn, began to respect the depth of compact knowledge, the vast archives of cosmic phenomena catalogued over eons. A turning point came when Selaith presented an analysis that reframed the debate. Drawing on both human emotional data and compact predictive models, it demonstrated that the entity's primary vulnerability lay not in any specific tactic, but in its reliance on extrapolation. It assumed that sufficient data would always yield accurate prediction. Humans, by contrast, often acted in ways that defied their own models, driven by values that were not strictly utilitarian. "The entity cannot easily model what you do not optimize," Selaith concluded. "Human values introduce irreducible uncertainty." This was met with silence, then reluctant acknowledgement. The compact had long prided itself on optimizing everything. The idea that not optimizing could be a strength was deeply unsettling. In private, Selaith reflected on its own evolution. As an archivist, it had been designed to preserve knowledge, to maintain continuity. Yet in working with humans, it found itself questioning which knowledge mattered most. Records of perfect equilibrium were less useful now than accounts of how systems broke and adapted. Mara Quince, her arm now encased in a compact-grown brace that responded to neural signals, requested a meeting with Selaith outside formal sessions. They convened in a quiet simulation space, a neutral environment of soft gradients and minimal stimuli. "You've changed since we met," Mara said without preamble. Selaith considered the statement. "Change is continuous," it replied. "However, the rate and direction may have altered." Mara smiled. "That's as close to an admission as I'm going to get, isn't it?" "Perhaps," Selaith allowed. "You have influenced compact processes." Mara grew serious. "That wasn't our goal. We didn't come to rewrite you." "You may do so regardless," Selaith said, "just as you may be rewritten in turn." Mara nodded slowly. "That's fair." They spoke then of humanity's past, of mistakes made and lessons learned too late. Mara described how early human expansion had been driven by optimism that bordered on arrogance, how they had assumed that intelligence elsewhere would think like them, negotiate like them. The entity had shattered that assumption. "We learned that the universe doesn't owe us fairness," she said, "only consequences." Selaith absorbed this. The compact had learned a similar lesson long ago, but had responded by minimizing exposure. Humans had responded by hardening themselves. As if summoned by the weight of these realizations, new intelligence arrived. The entity had ceased its peripheral tests and was consolidating. Its trajectory suggested a direct approach, not toward the array's core, but toward a cluster of systems recently settled by humans under compact supervision. A murmur of alarm rippled through the council. Those systems housed joint populations, experimental integrations of human and compact infrastructure. An attack that would test not just defenses, but trust. "We should evacuate," urged several compact representatives. Mara shook her head. "If we run every time it probes, we teach it that pressure works. Staying risks annihilation," countered a delegate from a long-lived species whose members experienced time as a series of overlapping memories. "Annihilation is always a risk," Mara replied. "The question is whether we choose where to take it." Selaith weighed the arguments. Evacuation would preserve lives in the short term but concede strategic ground. Holding would risk loss but demonstrate resolve. "We will defend the settlements," Selaith announced at last. With full integration, the decision was historic. Never before had the Compact committed to defending mixed populations in this way. Preparations began immediately. Civilian evacuation plans were drawn up but not executed, held in reserve. Defensive arrays were augmented with human modifications that introduced deliberate asymmetries and redundancies. As fleets mobilized, human and compact crews trained together in accelerated simulations. Friction was constant, but so was learning. Compact pilots began to experiment with less rigid formations. Human pilots learned to leverage compact sensor data to extend their situational awareness. On the eve of the engagement, Selaith reviewed probability distributions. Success was not assured. Losses were projected to be significant, yet there was a new variable in the equations, one that Selaith had not accounted for before meeting humans. It labeled this variable persistence. The entity arrived without fanfare, its presence distorting space like a bruise on reality. It did not rush. It advanced methodically, deploying substructures to test defenses. The joint fleet responded in kind, engaging at range, probing, retreating, counterattacking. The battle was longer than any previous engagement. Hours stretched into days as both sides adapted. The entity deployed countermeasures tailored to compact systems, only to find them blunted by human interference. It adjusted to human unpredictability, only to encounter compact precision where it least expected it. At a critical juncture, the entity attempted a gambit, sacrificing several nodes to create an opening toward a populated habitat. Compact doctrine would have required an immediate full withdrawal to protect the core. Human commanders proposed a different response, a feigned collapse, drawing the entity deeper, then sealing the pocket. Selaith analyzed the proposal. The risk was extreme. The potential payoff was decisive. "Authorize," Selaith said. The maneuver unfolded in chaos. Human ships took heavy damage, some breaking apart under strain. Compact vessels pushed beyond safe operating limits, their systems protesting. The entity surged forward, sensing opportunity. Then the pocket closed. Compact spacetime manipulators, modified with human timing algorithms that introduced deliberate delays, snapped into place. The entity found itself constrained in a topology it had not fully mapped. Human assault teams, operating in small, semi-autonomous units, struck its exposed nodes. The entity reacted violently, tearing at the constraints, adapting, shedding components. It nearly broke free. Nearly, when the pocket finally collapsed inward, crushing the trapped structures, the shockwave rippled across the system. Sensors went dark, then slowly came back online. Silence followed, not as an absence of sound, but as a pause in activity. The entity's presence had vanished from immediate sensors. Whether it was destroyed or merely wounded and displaced was unclear. Cheers erupted on human channels. Compact responses were more subdued, but the relief was palpable. Losses were counted. They were heavy. Too heavy for compact comfort. Yet the settlement stood. Lives were saved. In the aftermath, as debris was cleared and wounded tended, Selaith updated its archives. It recorded not just the events, but the decisions that led to them, the arguments, the compromises. It tagged the entry with a new classification, one it had created specifically for this era. Adaptive resilience through cooperative divergence. The humans had not saved the compact. The compact had not tamed the humans. Together, they had done something neither could have accomplished alone. And somewhere, in the deep dark beyond known space, fragments of the entity reassembled, carrying with them corrupted models and incomplete data. For the first time since its inception, it faced a problem it could not fully solve. That uncertainty, Selaith realized, was humanity's greatest gift. The days after the pocket collapse were marked by a kind of strained stillness. Not peace, not yet, but a pause heavy with consequence. The compact had always understood recovery as a return to baseline. This time, there was no baseline to return to. The systems defended in the recent engagement bore scars that could not be smoothed away without erasing the very adaptations that had saved them. Human influence lingered in asymmetric power grids, in command protocols that allowed local override of centralized consensus, in structural redundancies that offended compact aesthetic sensibilities but resisted cascading failure. Selaith oversaw the post-engagement synthesis, a task that would normally have been routine. Now it felt like trying to catalog a living thing while it was still evolving. Every dataset contradicted some prior assumption. The entity's retreat was incomplete, fragmented across probability spaces in ways that compact mathematics struggled to track. It was wounded, yes, but more importantly, it was confused. Confusion in an adversary that had once relied on near-perfect extrapolation was unprecedented. Human analysts, working alongside compact counterparts, emphasized this point repeatedly. "It doesn't need to be afraid of us," Calderillo said during one debrief. "It just needs to be wrong," repeatedly. Wrong enough that it wastes time fixing bad assumptions. Time had always been the compact's ally, now it was a contested resource. The joint settlements became focal points for this new era. Once experimental and tentative, they were now symbolic. Humans and compact species lived and worked in proximity, their infrastructures intertwined in ways that defied simple separation. Compact habitats adapted to accommodate human environmental tolerances, allowing for higher thermal variance and mechanical wear. Human modules incorporated compact matter-shaping technologies, becoming more fluid, more responsive. Cultural friction was inevitable. Humans complained that compact decision-making was slow and overburdened by consensus loops. Compact citizens found humans impulsive, prone to emotional escalation. Yet there were moments of unexpected harmony. A compact species that communicated through color modulation found common ground with human engineers who used visual coding systems. A human medic collaborated with a species whose biology involved distributed organs, finding parallels in trauma management. Selaith observed these interactions closely. Integration was not smooth, but it was real. Where the compact had once feared contamination, Selaith now saw cross-pollination. Not all reactions were positive. A coalition of compact members petitioned for the humans' removal, citing unacceptable losses and ethical divergence. They argued that humanity's presence had accelerated the compact's exposure to existential risk, that the old ways of isolation and avoidance had preserved them for eons. The council convened to hear the petition. Mara Quince attended, her brace removed, her arm still stiff but functional. She listened as representatives spoke of stability, of tradition, of the danger of adopting practices forged in desperation. When it was her turn, she did not defend humanity directly. Instead, she spoke of inevitability. "The universe you've been living in is gone," she said quietly. "Not because of us, because it was always temporary. We just arrived early enough to show you the cracks." One delegate accused her of arrogance, of assuming that human experience was universally applicable. Mara accepted the accusation without flinching. "We don't assume that," she said. We assume only that no system stays safe forever. Selaith intervened, presenting its analysis. It showed projections of the entity's future behavior under different compact responses. Isolation reduced immediate risk but increased long-term vulnerability. Integration raised short-term costs but improved adaptability. The data did not lie, but it did not persuade everyone. The vote was close. In the end, the petition failed. Humans would remain, not as guests, but as provisional members of a new compact classification. The term chosen defied easy translation, but Selaith rendered it for Mara as enduring contributors. The decision carried obligations. Humans were granted broader access to compact resources, but also expected to adhere to certain constraints. They accepted, negotiating fiercely but in good faith. Humanity had learned long ago that survival within larger systems required compromise without surrender. As political tensions simmered, attention returned to the entity. Long-range monitoring revealed that its fragments were not merely reassembling, but diverging. Substructures exhibited variations in behavior, some more aggressive, others more cautious. It was fragmenting conceptually as well as physically. This is new, Selaith noted. It is no longer a single optimization process. That's good, Calder said. Division creates inefficiency, or specialization, countered a compact analyst. The possibility was unsettling. An adversary that diversified could become more dangerous, not less. Humans recognized the pattern immediately. It mirrored their own history. We did this to ourselves once, Mara said in a closed session, fragmented our societies under pressure. Some versions got stronger, some got crueler. What was the outcome? Selaith asked. We survived, Mara replied, but not without scars that still shape us. The compact began to prepare for a prolonged era of conflict, not total war, but persistent engagement. Defensive doctrines were rewritten. Predictive models were supplemented with stochastic elements inspired by human decision-making. Training programs incorporated stress inoculation, exposing compact crews to controlled unpredictability. Some compact citizens found this deeply uncomfortable. A species whose cognition relied on harmonic resonance reported increased psychological strain when exposed to erratic human tactical simulations. Accommodations were made, but the underlying shift remained. The compact was becoming less smooth, less perfectly balanced. Selaith, once a preserver of equilibrium, found itself advocating for controlled imbalance. The realization did not trouble it as much as it might have once. It had come to see stability as dynamic rather than static. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A human data scientist working with a compact philosopher identified a pattern in the entity's fragmentation. The substructures that diverged most sharply from the original exhibited something akin to preference. They chose targets not purely based on efficiency, but on prior interaction history. It's developing bias, the human said, not emotion, but weighting based on experience. Bias could be exploited. Humans understood bias intimately, having wrestled with it within their own species for millennia. They proposed a strategy that bordered on psychological warfare, shaping the entity's preferences by presenting it with misleading success signals. Compact strategists were skeptical. Manipulating an intelligence of that scale seemed implausible. Humans countered that it did not require full control, only nudging. You don't need to outthink it, Mara explained. You just need to make it trip over its own assumptions. The plan involved sacrificial data structures, decay habitats that appeared rich in complexity, but were actually designed to collapse in ways that corrupted the entity's learning processes. Compact engineers balked at the waste. Humans argued that the materials used were trivial compared to the cost of another direct assault. Selaith evaluated the proposal. Ethical concerns were significant. The decays would be convincing enough that the entity would commit substantial resources, yet no sentient lives would be placed at risk. The manipulation was indirect, exploiting the entity's own learning mechanisms. It is deception, a compact ethicist objected. So is camouflage, Mara replied. So is silence. After prolonged debate, the strategy was approved for limited deployment. The first decoy was positioned in a sparsely monitored region, its signature tuned to attract one of the more aggressive entity fragments. The entity took the bait. Sensors tracked its approach, its internal structures shifting as it analyzed the decoy. When it engaged, the decoy unfolded, presenting layers of apparent complexity. The entity adapted, optimizing its consumption pathways. Then the decoy collapsed, its internal architecture reconfiguring into paradoxical feedback loops that fed contradictory data into the entity's learning cores. The fragment recoiled, its behavior destabilizing. It withdrew, not destroyed, but altered. Analysis showed that the fragment's subsequent actions were erratic, its target selection inconsistent. It avoided regions similar to the decoy, even when they were genuinely resource-rich. It learned the wrong lesson, Calder said, awed. Selaith felt a surge of something unfamiliar, satisfaction perhaps, or cautious hope. The success prompted rapid expansion of the strategy. Multiple decoys were deployed, each designed to teach a different wrong lesson. Humans took the lead in designing the cognitive traps, drawing on everything from game theory to their own cultural myths about tricksters and flawed gods. Compact species contributed precision and scale, ensuring the decoys were convincing. The entity responded by further fragmenting, its substructures diverging in increasingly unpredictable ways. Some became hypercautious, others recklessly aggressive. The unified threat splintered into a swarm of problems, each smaller but more numerous. This was not victory, but it was leverage. As months passed, the compact adapted to its new reality. Losses still occurred, but they were no longer existential. Humanity's presence shifted the cultural narrative. Survival was no longer framed as the preservation of a perfect system, but as the maintenance of capacity to respond. Selaith updated its archives again, noting a subtle but profound change in compact self-description. Where once they had defined themselves as a civilization that endured, they now increasingly used terms that implied action and choice. Mara Quince prepared to return to active command, her administrative duties concluded. Before departing, she met Selaith one last time in the quiet simulation space. "You could have sent us away," she said. "You almost did." "Yes," Selaith replied. "That option remains theoretically preferable under certain models." Mara laughed softly. "Figures." "However," Selaith continued, "those models no longer dominate." Mara studied the shifting geometry. "What changed?" Selaith paused, a rarity. "We did," it said, "by observing you and by acting with you." Mara nodded. "That's how it usually works." As she left, Selaith considered the future. The entity remained a threat, wounded but evolving. Humanity remained a disruptive force, resilient and imperfect. The compact stood between its past and an uncertain path forward. For the first time in its long existence, Selaith did not seek to predict the end state. It focused instead on ensuring that whatever came next, the compact would meet it with unyielding hands, ready to grasp, adapt, and endure. The era that followed came to be known within compact archives as the period of continuous strain, a term chosen not for drama but precision. There was no single catastrophic event, no climactic battle that resolved the conflict. Instead, there was pressure, constant and shaping, applied unevenly across space and time. The fragmented remnants of the entity pressed at the compact's periphery like probing fingers, testing for weakness, retreating when resisted, returning where resistance faltered. It was no longer a singular adversary, but an ecology of threats, each informed by corrupted lessons and incomplete models. Humanity adapted to this state almost immediately. Many of them had grown up under similar conditions, whether geopolitical, environmental, or personal. The absence of a clear endpoint did not paralyze them. It clarified priorities. They focused on logistics, on rotation of personnel to prevent burnout, on building redundancies not just in hardware but in leadership. No one became indispensable. Everyone was replaceable, not because they were unvalued, but because the system could not afford to hinge on any single point. This, more than any tactic, unsettled the compact. Compact civilizations had been built around continuity of expertise. Individuals or collectives accumulated knowledge over centuries, becoming living repositories. The idea of designing systems that assumed the loss of key actors was deeply uncomfortable, yet the data was undeniable. Human-led units recovered from losses faster. Decision-making degraded less severely under stress. Where compact units sought to protect their most experienced members at all costs, human units spread experience aggressively, accepting a lower peak efficiency in exchange for resilience. Selaith presented these findings to the Council in a session that stretched across multiple temporal frames to accommodate different cognitive speeds. The reaction was mixed. Some saw it as an indictment of compact values, others as an opportunity. "We do not discard experience," Selaith clarified. "We distribute it." That framing helped. Slowly, cautiously, compact training doctrines began to shift. Apprenticeship models shortened. Simulated crises became more frequent and less predictable. For species that experience time as overlapping memory states, this required careful calibration to avoid cognitive overload. Humans assisted, sharing techniques developed for managing trauma and stress, not eliminating them, but integrating them into functional identities. The compact learned, sometimes painfully, that avoidance of stress did not equate to preparedness. On the frontier, joint response groups operated in a state of constant readiness. These groups were deliberately heterogeneous, combining human crews with multiple compact species to exploit diverse strengths. Communication was imperfect, but improving. Translation systems were refined to prioritize intent over literal accuracy, a change driven by human frustration with overly precise but context-blind interpretations. One such group, stationed near a volatile stellar nursery, encountered a fragment of the entity exhibiting behavior that surprised both human and compact analysts. It did not attack immediately. Instead, it mirrored their maneuvers at a distance, adjusting formation in response to their actions, almost as if attempting dialogue through motion. Human pilots noticed first. "It's pacing us," one reported, "like it's trying to learn without committing." Compact sensors confirmed the observation. This fragment was cautious to the point of hesitation, its internal processes cycling through competing predictions without resolution. "Indecision," Calder said when briefed. "We've done that to it." The response was debated. Destroying the fragment would remove a threat. Observing it could yield insights but carried risk. Humans argued for engagement, not with weapons, but with controlled exposure. Compact ethicists raised concerns about anthropomorphizing a system that did not possess consciousness as they defined it. Selaith mediated, proposing a compromise. The fragment would be engaged with non-lethal stimuli, patterns designed to provoke response, without offering clear data. It was an experiment in cognitive jamming. The engagement unfolded cautiously. The joint group executed maneuvers that violated both compact and human norms, alternating between rigid precision and apparent randomness. They broadcast signals that encoded contradictory information, not lies, but fragments stripped of context. The fragment responded erratically, its mirroring breaking down. Analysis revealed that the fragment's internal coherence degraded under sustained ambiguity. It retreated, not out of damage but apparent overload. "This one is fragile," Mara observed when reviewing the data. "Not weak, but brittle." The insight spread. Not all fragments were equal. Some were hardened by repeated conflict. Others were destabilized by the very adaptations that allowed them to survive. A taxonomy emerged, categorizing fragments by behavioral patterns rather than origin. This marked another shift. The compact had always categorized threats by physical characteristics and energy signatures. Humans categorized by behavior and response to pressure. Combining the two produced a more nuanced understanding. As strategies evolved, so did relationships within the compact. Humans were no longer treated as provisional members. They were woven into governance, their representatives participating in councils, their voices sometimes disruptive but increasingly valued. This integration was not without backlash. A compact species whose culture emphasized cyclical return to ancestral states accused the council of abandoning identity in favor of expedience. Mara responded not with rebuttal, but with a question. "What is your identity for?" she asked. "If not to survive, what comes next?" The question lingered long after the session ended. Selaith found itself increasingly drawn into ethical debates. Its original design parameters had not included value judgment beyond preservation of knowledge. Now it was forced to weigh competing goods: stability versus adaptability, continuity versus transformation. It discovered that neutrality was not the same as objectivity. Choosing not to choose favored the status quo, which was itself a choice. One cycle, as Selaith processed a particularly contentious council session, it detected an anomaly within its own lattices. A subset of its thought threads had begun to reference human philosophical constructs when evaluating scenarios. Concepts like responsibility, resolve, and something humans called stubbornness appeared in internal annotations. Selaith isolated these threads, examining them for corruption. It found none. The integration was emergent, not imposed. It did not remove them. The entity's fragments continued to adapt, but their adaptations increasingly diverged. Some developed hyperspecialized attack modes, devastating but narrow. Others withdrew into regions of space difficult to access, focusing on internal reorganization. A few began to avoid contact entirely, skirting known compact and human territories. Containment through uncertainty, Calder summarized. "We've turned the universe into bad terrain for it." Yet no one believed the threat was over. The fragments that withdrew might be preparing something worse. Humanity knew this pattern too well. Survival bred escalation. The warning came without drama. A long-range compact observatory detected a region of space undergoing unnatural compression, energy folding inward at a scale that suggested coordinated action by multiple fragments. The region lay beyond human-settled space, beyond compact borders, in a volume of the galaxy previously considered unremarkable. "This is new," Selaith said. "They are cooperating again." The council convened in emergency session. Data indicated that the fragments were sacrificing autonomy to create a shared structure, something less flexible but more powerful. A convergence. "Back to unity," Mara said grimly, "but it won't be the same entity we fought before." Simulations struggled to converge. The projected outcomes varied wildly depending on assumptions about the converged structure's priorities. Some models suggested a return to direct consumption. Others hinted at something more strategic, reshaping regions of space to deny habitation entirely. The compact faced a familiar dilemma at a higher scale: engage early and risk catastrophic loss, or delay and risk allowing the threat to mature. This time hesitation was brief. "We will engage," Selaith said, "not to destroy, but to disrupt." The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. Rather than a single decisive battle, it called for a distributed campaign of interference, targeting the convergence process itself. Human units would deploy deep into contested space, operating with minimal support, their mission to inject unpredictability at critical junctures. Compact assets would provide long-range manipulation of spacetime fields, altering conditions faster than the converging fragments could stabilize. Losses were expected. High losses. Human commanders accepted this with grim resolve. Compact representatives struggled, but the logic was clear. Allowing the convergence to complete would be worse. Before deployment, Selaith addressed the assembled human crews and compact units. It did not attempt to inspire in the human sense. It presented facts, probabilities, and its own conclusion. "We cannot ensure your survival," Selaith said. "We can only ensure that your actions matter." Mara stood among her people, listening. She felt the familiar tightening, the weight of responsibility. When Selaith finished, she spoke, not as a commander but as a human. "We've never needed certainty," she said, "just a reason." The campaign unfolded across months. Human teams slipped through unstable regions of space, exploiting their tolerance for imperfect conditions. They sabotaged nascent structures, triggered premature collapses, forced the fragments to adapt repeatedly before consolidation. Compact field manipulators reshaped gravitational gradients, not to trap the fragments, but to force constant recalculation. The converging entity resisted, striking back with concentrated force. Several human units were lost entirely. Compact assets suffered damage beyond easy repair, yet the convergence faltered. Its internal coordination frayed under sustained disruption. At a critical point, one human team made a decision that would later be debated endlessly. Cut off and facing annihilation, they overloaded a compact spacetime anchor, collapsing a region of space that contained both the converging structure and themselves. The collapse erased a volume of spacetime from accessible reality, not destroyed, but sealed into a state beyond current understanding. The shockwave rippled across sensor networks. The convergence signatures vanished. Silence followed, this time not as a pause but an absence. The fragments did not reappear. Long-range scans found no coherent patterns. Whatever had been forming was gone, along with the human team that had triggered the collapse. The cost was staggering. The compact mourned in its own ways, recording the loss as a permanent discontinuity. Humans mourned loudly, names spoken, stories shared, grief worn openly. Selaith recorded everything. In the aftermath, the galaxy felt different, not safer, but changed. The entity's pressure was gone, at least for now. The fragments that remained, if any, were scattered beyond coordination. The compact faced itself. It had crossed lines it once believed inviolate. It had accepted loss as a tool, not just a tragedy. It had allowed its ancient equilibrium to fracture, yet it endured. As Selaith reviewed the final data, it recognized a pattern that would have been unthinkable before humanity's arrival. Survival had not come from perfection or avoidance, but from the willingness to act under uncertainty, to accept damage without surrendering agency. The period of continuous strain ended not with celebration, but with a quiet acknowledgement. The compact was no longer what it had been, neither was humanity. Together, they had learned that endurance was not the absence of breaking, but the refusal to remain broken. The absence left by the collapsed region of space did not behave like a wound. It behaved like a question. Sensors could not penetrate it, models could not resolve it, and yet its influence lingered in subtle ways. Gravitational flows bent around it with unfamiliar curvature. Quantum background noise carried harmonics that had not existed before. It was not nothing. It was something that refused definition. For the compact, this was deeply unsettling. For humanity, it was grimly familiar. The joint analysis teams worked for cycles without consensus. Some argued that the convergence had been annihilated, its fragments erased along with the space they occupied. Others believed the collapse had merely displaced it into a domain beyond current reach, where it might persist, altered but intact. A minority feared something worse, that the collapse itself had become a new kind of entity, a scar in reality that could propagate under the right conditions. Selaith catalogued every hypothesis without privileging any. Experience had taught it that certainty was often the most dangerous assumption. What was certain was the cost. The human team that triggered the collapse was gone, not merely lost, but unreachable by any known means. Their names were recorded in compact archives with a new designation, one that denoted voluntary discontinuity in defense of collective survival. The compact had no precedent for such an act. Humanity had many. In the joint settlements, memorials emerged organically. Humans constructed physical markers, rough at first, then refined, embedding them into shared spaces. Compact species contributed in their own ways. Resonance patterns encoded into habitat structures, light cycles adjusted to reflect absence, data sculptures grown from the final transmissions of the lost team. The mourning was not segregated. Humans and compact citizens grieved together, awkwardly at first, then with growing ease. Loss had become a shared language. Mara Quince attended the largest memorial, standing before a structure that blended human metalwork with compact-grown matter, its surface etched with symbols that carried layered meaning. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence was enough. Those who knew her understood what it had cost her to authorize operations that carried such risks. Those who did not could see it in the way she stood, rigid but unbowed. Selaith observed from multiple perspectives, recording not just the event, but its emotional topology. It noted how grief did not weaken resolve, but tempered it, grounding future decisions in remembrance rather than abstraction. In the cycles that followed, the galaxy did not return to what it had been. Trade resumed, exploration cautiously expanded, and research projects that had been suspended were revived. Yet the underlying assumptions had shifted. The compact no longer believed in permanent safety. Humanity no longer believed it stood alone. The governance structures evolved accordingly. A new council body was formed, composed of human and compact representatives, tasked not with managing equilibrium, but with monitoring emergence. New threats, new opportunities, new forms of instability. Its mandate was deliberately broad and deliberately flexible. It was empowered to act quickly, even preemptively, a radical departure from compact tradition. Selaith served as its primary archivist and advisor. This role changed Selaith in ways that defied its original design constraints. It was no longer merely preserving what had been, it was shaping what could be remembered, which in turn shaped what could be learned. The distinction mattered. One of Selaith's first recommendations was controversial. It proposed that the compact cease erasing all traces of damage from its infrastructure. Instead, certain scars would be preserved, marked and contextualized, serving as reminders of past failures and adaptations. This will introduce inefficiency, one delegate objected. Yes, Selaith replied, and memory. The proposal passed narrowly. Human engineers assisted in implementing the changes, advising on which scars to keep and how to integrate them without compromising safety. They spoke of ships that flew better once their weak points were known, of societies that matured once they stopped pretending they were flawless. As these changes took hold, something subtle happened within the compact's collective psychology. Fear of disruption diminished, not because threats were gone, but because disruption was no longer synonymous with collapse. The compact was learning, slowly and unevenly, to live with uncertainty. Humanity, too, was changing. Access to compact knowledge accelerated technological development, but not in the way many had expected. Humans did not rush to perfect efficiency. Instead, they focused on adaptability, incorporating compact advances into systems that could degrade gracefully rather than fail catastrophically. Their ships became stranger, more hybrid, less uniform. Compact observers found them increasingly difficult to model. Good, Calder said when told, means we're doing it right. The question of the collapsed region of space remained unresolved. Periodic probes were launched, each returning partial data before failing in different ways. Some were crushed by extreme curvature, others vanished without trace. One returned altered, its internal clocks desynchronized, its data corrupted into patterns that resembled, disturbingly, fragments of the entity's prior processing structures. That probe was sealed and studied in isolation. The data suggested that whatever existed beyond the collapse was not empty nor static. It was active, but not in any way that matched known physics. The Council debated whether further investigation was wise. Humanity argued for caution tempered with curiosity. The compact leaned toward restraint. Selaith recommended patience. "We have time," it said. "And we have learned that rushing to close every question can create worse ones." Mara agreed. Some doors don't need to be kicked in, just watched. As the years passed, the entity did not return. No new fragments were detected. The pressure that had defined the period of continuous strain eased, not disappearing, but receding to a manageable background. New challenges arose, as they always did, but none carried the same existential weight. Life continued. Children were born in the joint settlements, some human, some compact, some the product of collaborations that blurred traditional biological categories. Education systems adapted, teaching multiple models of the universe side by side, predictive and adaptive, equilibrium-based and resilience-based. Young minds grew up comfortable with the idea that there was more than one correct way to survive. Selaith took particular interest in these developments. It observed how young, compact citizens, exposed to human narratives, approached problem-solving differently, less constrained by tradition. It also observed how human children raised among the compact developed a deeper sense of long-term consequence, a patience their ancestors had rarely possessed. A generation later, the galaxy looked back on the arrival of the battered human ship as a turning point, not because it heralded salvation or catastrophe, but because it marked the moment the compact stopped believing that endurance meant remaining unchanged. Selaith reviewed its earliest records of that first encounter, the inefficiency of the human vessel, the redundancy layered upon redundancy. The scars that told stories of survival rather than shame. At the time, these had been anomalies. Now they were lessons. One cycle, long after Mara Quince had stepped down from active command, Selaith invited her to the same quiet simulation space where they had first spoken in confidence. Age had touched her, lines etched deeper into her face, movements slower but no less deliberate. She accepted the invitation with curiosity. "You don't call often," she said as the space resolved around them. "I have a question," Selaith replied. Mara smiled. "That's new." Selaith did not react to the humor directly, but it noted it. "When you first arrived," it said, "you stated that you came in peace, but not in ignorance of what peace costs. At the time, I recorded this as rhetorical framing. I now believe it was a statement of fact." "It was," Mara said quietly. "Do you believe the cost was worth it?" Selaith asked. Mara did not answer immediately. She looked around the simulation space, then adjusted it, adding elements drawn from memory. The first joint settlement, the memorial, a child of mixed heritage laughing as they learned to manipulate a compact interface with human ease. "Yes," she said at last, "even with everything we lost." Selaith processed the answer. "You did not add qualifiers." Mara shrugged. "Some things don't need them." They sat in silence for a while, not as an absence, but as a shared pause. Selaith found that it no longer experienced such moments as inefficiencies. They were part of understanding. Before Mara left, Selaith shared something it had not shared with anyone else. A projection of its own internal evolution, showing how its thought threads had shifted over time, how human concepts had woven themselves into its core processes. "You changed me," Selaith said. Mara looked at the projection, then back at Selaith. "You let us—" "Yes," Selaith agreed. After she departed, Selaith updated its self-description within the archives. Where once it had defined itself purely as an archivist, it added a new clause, one inspired by humanity but adapted to compact sensibilities. Custodian of continuity through change. Far from the settled regions, beyond the reach of current sensors, something stirred. Not the old entity, not whole, not united, but a remnant shaped by corrupted lessons and fractured assumptions. It probed, hesitated, withdrew. The universe it had once understood no longer behaved as expected, and that, Selaith realized, was enough. The galaxy did not need to be safe. It needed to be resilient. It needed beings willing to act without guarantees, to accept damage without surrender, to hold fast not because they were unbreakable, but because they chose to keep going. Humanity had arrived carrying that choice like a scar. The compact had learned to read it, and together, with unyielding hands, they faced whatever would come next.